Play that again. The words came out low, controlled, but something in them made the entire studio freeze. Ethan Caldwell stood motionless in the center of the dim room, the soft glow of LED panels casting long shadows across polished floors and soundproof glass. A billion-dollar empire waited for his next decision across town, but none of it existed right now. Not the board meeting, not the investors, not the headlines, just the song. The producer hesitated, fingers hovering above the console. "Sir, we already ran it twice." Ethan didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the speakers like they might break open and reveal something hidden inside. Then run it a third time. The music returned, soft at first, like a memory trying to decide if it should stay buried. A guitar, simple, unpolished. Then the voice. Female, warm, textured, carrying something deeper than skill. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And that was the problem. Ethan's jaw tightened as the melody unfolded, each note pressing against something he hadn't touched in years. Something he had chosen not to remember. His fingers curled slightly at his sides. He knew this song. Not from charts. Not from radio. Not from anything that could be explained. He knew it because it had once belonged to a moment he thought no longer existed. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. The producer shifted, unsure. "Street recording. One of our scouts picked it up downtown." Said the voice was different. Different. Ethan let out a slow breath, but it didn't steady him. It made everything sharper. "Who is she?" "We don't have much yet. Just a name." The room seemed to lean in as the music reached its final line. The voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It settled into silence like it knew it had already done enough. Ethan swallowed. "Say it." "Naomi Brooks." The name landed, but it wasn't the name that mattered. It was the echo behind it. The way the last note of the song refused to leave the room. Ethan turned slightly, finally breaking his stare from the speakers, but not from the past. Where was this recorded? Corner of 52nd and Lexington. 3 days ago. 3 days. Ethan blinked once, then again, as if recalculating something deeper than time. 3 days ago, he had been there, stepping out of a car, already late, already distracted, already moving through the city like he owned every inch of it. And then he had stopped, not slowed, not hesitated, stopped. The memory hit without warning. The sound of traffic fading, the sharp click of his dress shoes against concrete, and then that voice cutting through everything, clean and undeniable. He hadn't known why he crossed the street. Not then, but he knew now. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that didn't release tension, it revealed it. "Give me everything you have on her," he said, voice steady again, but quieter than before. The producer nodded quickly, relieved to move, to do something. But Ethan didn't move. Not yet, because the song was still playing in his head. And this time, it wasn't just a song. It was a door. One he had closed a long time ago. One he had locked, buried, and convinced himself no longer mattered. Until now. Because somewhere in the city, a woman he had never met was singing something she should not have known. And somehow, she wasn't just singing it. She was remembering it. The city did not slow down for anyone, not even for a memory trying to find its way back. Ethan Caldwell stepped out of his building just after sunrise, the glass doors closing silently behind him as the chill of early Manhattan air brushed against his face. His driver moved to open the car door, but Ethan did not get in. Not this time. "Take the morning off," he said without looking. The driver hesitated, confused, but nodded. Ethan rarely changed plans. He rarely paused at all. But today was already different. He adjusted his coat and began walking, his shoes striking the pavement with a steady rhythm that matched nothing except the replay in his mind. That melody. It had followed him out of the studio, into his car, into his silence. Now it followed him here. Block after block, the city unfolded in its usual patterns. Coffee carts steaming at corners. Early commuters checking their watches. Taxi horns slicing through the morning air. But Ethan was not seeing any of it clearly. His focus narrowed with every step as he approached the intersection the producer had mentioned. 52nd and Lexington. He slowed as he turned the corner, not wanting to admit it, even to himself. But something in his chest tightened as if it already knew what waited ahead. At first, there was nothing. Just the hum of traffic and the distant echo of footsteps. Then, faintly, almost hidden beneath the noise, a guitar. He stopped. The sound was softer than he remembered, but unmistakable. He followed it, each step quieter than the last, until the crowd parted just enough for him to see her. Naomi Brooks sat on a worn wooden stool near the edge of the sidewalk, her guitar resting comfortably in her hands as if it had always belonged there. Her posture was relaxed, but not careless. Focused, grounded. A small case lay open at her feet, but she was not looking at it. She was not looking at anything except the space just ahead of her, where the music seemed to exist on its own. Ethan stayed back, just out of her direct line of sight, watching, listening. The song was the same. Not similar. Not inspired by. The same. Each chord, each pause, each subtle shift in tone carried the exact weight he remembered. He felt it in his chest, in the way his breathing adjusted without permission. A man passed by and dropped a few bills into the case. Naomi nodded slightly without breaking the rhythm. Another person slowed, listened for a moment, then moved on. The city continued, indifferent as ever. But Ethan did not move. He could not. The final note lingered, stretching into the space between them before fading into the noise of the street. Naomi lifted her head slightly, her gaze scanning the crowd, and for a brief moment, her eyes landed on him. There was no recognition, no surprise, just a quiet awareness, as if she had expected someone to be there, even if she did not know who. Ethan stepped forward this time, closing the distance with a calm that masked the questions building inside him. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard without raising his voice. "You wrote that?" he asked. Naomi looked at him fully now, studying his face with a calm, measured expression. "No," she said simply. Her voice carried the same texture as her singing. Honest, unrushed. "Then who did?" Ethan pressed, his tone controlled, but something beneath it had shifted. Naomi glanced down at her guitar, her fingers brushing lightly against the strings as if deciding whether to answer at all. The street noise filled the silence between them, louder now, heavier. Finally, she looked back up. "Someone who never got the chance to finish it," she said. The words landed quietly, but they did not stay quiet. They moved through Ethan like a ripple he could not stop. He swallowed, his eyes searching hers for something more. "And how do you know it?" Naomi tilted her head slightly, as if the question itself carried more weight than the answer. For a second, it seemed like she might not respond. Then she said, "Because she made sure I would." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath a truth that had not fully revealed itself yet, but was already impossible to ignore. He took a breath, slower this time, steadier, though it did little to settle the growing realization forming at the edges of his mind. "What was her name?" he asked. Naomi's fingers tightened gently around the neck of the guitar, not in fear, not in hesitation, but in something closer to certainty. She held his gaze, unflinching now. "Why do you want to know?" she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. Because the truth was, he was no longer asking out of curiosity. He was asking because something inside him had already started connecting pieces he had spent years keeping apart. And for the first time in a long time, he was not sure he was ready for the answer. Naomi did not look away. The city moved around them in restless waves of motion and sound, but in that small space between them, everything felt suspended, as if time itself had stepped back to listen. Ethan held her gaze, searching for something familiar, something undeniable, but all he found was calm certainty. It unsettled him more than confusion ever could. "You asked why I want to know," he said finally, his voice quieter now, stripped of the authority people were used to hearing from him. "It is because that song, it is not supposed to be out here." Naomi's expression did not change, but her fingers lightly brushed the strings again, a soft, absent motion, like she was grounding herself in something real. "A lot of things are not supposed to happen," she replied. "That does not mean they did not." Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing just slightly as her words settled in. She was not defensive. She was not trying to impress him. She was simply stating something she believed to be true, and that made it harder to push past. "That song was never released," he continued, more firmly now. "It was never recorded. It was never shared." Naomi tilted her head a fraction, studying him more closely this time, as if she were measuring the weight behind his certainty. "Then you must know who wrote it," she said. It was not a question. It was an observation. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time. The noise of a passing bus rolled between them, momentarily breaking the stillness, but neither of them moved. "I might," he answered, though the words felt heavier than he expected. Naomi nodded once, slowly, as if that confirmed something for her. She adjusted the guitar slightly on her lap, then reached down beside her stool and pulled out a small, worn notebook. The cover was faded, edges softened by time and use. She held it for a moment before opening it, her fingers careful, deliberate, as if every page carried weight. Ethan's eyes dropped to the notebook, his focus tightening. Naomi flipped through a few pages, stopping halfway. Without a word, she turned it toward him. "Then maybe you recognize this," she said. Ethan stepped closer, his movements slower now, more cautious. He looked down at the page, and for a moment, nothing made sense. Then everything did. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly to the right, clean but not rigid, with certain letters curved in a way that felt almost like a signature hidden inside each word. His breath caught, not sharply, but deeply, like something inside him had been struck without warning. That is, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Naomi watched him carefully, her expression softening just slightly, not in sympathy, but in understanding. "She used to write everything down," Naomi said quietly, "even the parts she never showed anyone." Ethan's hand lifted slightly, as if he might reach for the notebook, but he stopped himself. There was a line between them, invisible but firm, and he was not sure he had the right to cross it. "Where did you get this?" he asked instead, his voice lower now, more controlled, but carrying something beneath it that had not been there before. Naomi closed the notebook gently, holding it against her chest for a moment before answering. "She gave it to me," she said. The simplicity of the answer landed harder than anything else. Ethan blinked, his mind moving quickly, trying to place a timeline, a connection, a reason. "That is not possible," he said, almost instinctively. Naomi did not react to the contradiction. She simply met his eyes again. "It is," she said. No argument. No explanation. Just certainty. The kind that did not need to prove itself. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, as if trying to find the missing piece hidden somewhere in plain sight. The way she held herself. The steadiness in her voice. The quiet strength behind her words. It was not just the song. It was not just the notebook. It was something deeper, something that felt less like coincidence and more like consequence. "When?" he asked after a moment, the question coming out softer than he intended. Naomi hesitated, just briefly, her gaze drifting past him for a second, as if the answer lived somewhere behind him, somewhere further back than the street, the city, the present moment. Then she brought her focus back to him. "Before she disappeared," she said. The words settled between them, heavier than the noise of the city, heavier than the memory of the song. Ethan felt his chest tighten again, but this time it was not just recognition. It was something else, something closer to realization. Because if what she was saying was true, then the past he had buried was not just resurfacing. It had been moving forward all along. And somehow, it had found its way back to him. The air between them did not move, even as the city rushed on without pause. Ethan Caldwell stood there, the weight of Naomi's last words pressing against something deeper than memory, something closer to truth. Before she disappeared. The phrase did not echo. It settled. It anchored itself somewhere he could not ignore anymore. He glanced down at the closed notebook still resting in her hands, then back up at her face, searching for any sign of uncertainty, any crack that might suggest she was mistaken. There was none. Naomi remained steady, her posture relaxed but grounded, as if she had already walked through this moment long before he arrived. "You keep saying that like it explains everything," Ethan said quietly, though his voice carried more tension now. "It does not." Naomi did not react to the edge in his tone. Instead, she shifted slightly on the stool, adjusting the guitar strap across her shoulder. The movement was small, but intentional, like she was preparing for something she knew was coming. "It does not have to explain everything," she replied. "Just enough." Ethan let out a breath that felt heavier than it should have been. Enough for what? He wanted to ask, but the question stayed unspoken. Because a part of him already understood. Enough to connect the past to the present. Enough to make him stop pretending those two things were separate. A car horn blared somewhere down the street, pulling a few glances from passers-by, but neither of them looked away. "If she gave that to you," Ethan continued, nodding slightly toward the notebook, "then you must have known her." Naomi's eyes softened, not with emotion, but with recognition of the direction he was moving. I did, she said simply. The words landed with a quiet finality that made everything else feel louder. Ethan's jaw tightened again, but this time he did not try to hide it. Then tell me, he said, his voice lower now, more direct. Tell me how. Naomi looked down for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the notebook, tracing its worn surface like it held more than just pages. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but no less steady. She used to come to the same place every Thursday night, she said. Small room. Nothing fancy. Just a few chairs, a single light, and people who cared more about listening than being seen. Ethan felt something shift immediately. Not a full memory, not yet, but a fragment. A space. A feeling. A music room, he said, almost to himself. Naomi nodded once. She never stayed long, she continued. She would play one or two songs, write something down, then leave before anyone could ask too many questions. Ethan's mind moved faster now, connecting details he had not touched in years. The late nights. The quiet places. The version of her that existed outside of everything he knew. And you were there, he said. Naomi met his eyes again. Every week, she answered. The certainty in her voice did not leave room for doubt. Ethan looked away for the first time, his gaze drifting past her to the flow of people moving through the intersection, each one unaware of the shift happening just feet away from them. He ran a hand slowly across his jaw, the gesture controlled, but revealing more than he intended. That does not explain how she gave you that notebook, he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, less confrontational, but more searching. Naomi did not respond immediately. Instead, she reached down and closed the latch on her guitar case, the soft click barely audible beneath the city noise. Then she stood. The movement was calm, deliberate, bringing her fully to eye level with him now. The distance between them felt smaller, but heavier. You are right, she said. It does not. Ethan turned his attention back to her, his expression tightening slightly, anticipating something more. Naomi held his gaze, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that had not been there before. Because she did not give it to me the way you are thinking, she continued. Ethan felt the words before he understood them. Then how? He asked, the question coming out almost automatically. Naomi took a small breath, not to steady herself, but to mark the moment. She left it for me, she said. The distinction was subtle, but it changed everything. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, the implications beginning to form, but not yet complete. Left it where, he pressed. Naomi's grip tightened slightly on the notebook, her eyes never leaving his. With instructions, she said. A pause followed, brief but significant. Then she added, instructions that included your name. The world did not stop. The city did not quiet. But for Ethan Caldwell, everything shifted into a different kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something undeniable. Because this was no longer about a song. It was no longer about a coincidence. It was about intention. And somehow, someone he had lost had been planning for this moment long before he ever realized it would come. The words did not leave him. Instructions that included your name. Ethan Caldwell stood there as if the ground beneath him had shifted into something unfamiliar, something he could not control with logic or distance. The city kept moving, people brushing past, voices rising and falling, but none of it reached him the same way anymore. His focus narrowed entirely on Naomi, on the notebook in her hands, on the quiet certainty in her eyes that refused to bend under his doubt. That does not make sense, he said finally, though his voice lacked the sharpness it once carried. It was not denial. It was resistance. Naomi did not argue. She had not argued once since he stepped into her world. Instead, she held the moment steady, allowing him to feel the weight of it without interruption. It was not supposed to, she replied softly. Ethan let out a breath, slower this time, his gaze dropping briefly to the pavement between them before lifting again. Then explain it, he said, not as a command, as a request. Naomi studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much of the truth he was ready to hear. Then she shifted her grip on the notebook and opened it again, carefully, deliberately. This time, she did not turn it toward him right away. She flipped through several pages, each one marked with handwritten lyrics, fragments of melodies, unfinished thoughts. Then she stopped. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of a single page before she looked up. She told me if I ever found myself standing in front of you. Naomi said, her voice steady but quieter now. I was supposed to show you this. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Before he even saw the page, Naomi turned the notebook toward him slowly. The handwriting was the same, unmistakable, but this time it was not lyrics. It was a letter. Short, direct, personal. Ethan stepped closer without realizing it, his eyes scanning the words as if they might disappear if he did not read them fast enough. His name was there, written clearly at the top, not as a memory, not as a reference, as if it had always been meant for this moment. His throat tightened as he read, each word landing with a precision that made it impossible to look away. She had written about time, about choices, about the things people leave unfinished when they think they have more of it than they do. She had not explained everything. That was not her way. But she had said enough. Enough to make it clear that she knew something was coming. Enough to make it clear that she had trusted someone else to carry what she could not. Ethan blinked slowly, the edges of the page softening for a moment before coming back into focus. Why her? He asked quietly, not looking up yet. Naomi closed the notebook gently, holding it close again before answering. Because I listened, she said. Ethan lifted his gaze, confusion and something deeper mixing behind his eyes. Naomi continued, her voice calm, grounded. Everyone else heard her music, she said. I heard what she was trying to say. The simplicity of it settled heavily between them. Ethan ran a hand slowly across his face, the motion revealing more than words could. And she just trusted you with this? He asked. Naomi nodded once. Not right away, she said. She waited. She watched. She made sure I would not treat it like something temporary. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, as if trying to understand how someone he had never known could now be holding something that mattered more than anything he had built in the last decade. You said she left instructions, he said. What else did she say? Naomi hesitated, just briefly, then answered. She said you would not come looking for this, she said. Ethan's expression tightened slightly. Naomi held his gaze. She said you would only find it when you were ready to stop. Running from it. The words did not accuse. They revealed. And that made them harder to ignore. Ethan looked away again, this time longer, his eyes drifting across the city that had always given him something to focus on, something to control. But now, for the first time in a long time, it felt distant. Secondary. And you think this is that moment? He asked quietly. Naomi did not hesitate. I know it is, she said. Ethan stood still, the noise of the world pressing in around him, but no longer defining the moment. Because something else had taken its place. Not certainty. Not yet. But direction. And for a man who had built his life on knowing exactly where he was going, that was the one thing he had not felt in years. The direction did not feel clear. It felt unfamiliar. And that was what made Ethan hesitate. He had built his entire life on certainty, on decisions that came fast and landed clean. But this was not one of those moments. This was something slower, heavier, something that refused to be solved in a single move. He looked back at Naomi, his expression quieter now, less guarded but more exposed. If she knew I would not come looking, he said slowly, then why leave something for me at all? Naomi did not answer immediately. She adjusted the strap of her guitar again, then rested her hand lightly against the body of it, as if grounding herself in the same rhythm that had brought him here in the first place. Because not coming does not mean not needing, she said. The words settled into him in a way that logic could not push aside. Ethan exhaled through his nose, his gaze drifting down to the notebook once more. And what exactly did she think I needed? He asked. Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering him, not judging, not assuming, just observing. That is not something she could write for you, she said. That part you have to hear yourself. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. You keep answering questions with something else, he said. Naomi met his eyes, calm as ever. Because you are asking the wrong ones, she replied. That stopped him. Not because it challenged him, but because it felt true. He looked away again, his gaze moving across the street, the buildings, the endless movement of people who had no idea what was unfolding just steps away. He had always been good at asking the right questions. That was how he built everything. But this was different. Then what should I be asking? He said after a moment, his voice quieter now, more open than before. Naomi did not hesitate this time. Why did she believe you would understand this now, When you could not before, she said. The question landed deeper than anything else had. Ethan felt it immediately, not as a thought, but as a shift. Because the truth was, he had not understood her then. Not completely. He had seen pieces, heard fragments, but he had always been moving too fast, too focused on what came next to sit with what was right in front of him. And now those same pieces were being handed back to him, but in a different way. Slower. Unavoidable. You said she waited before trusting you, he said, bringing his focus back to Naomi. What changed? Naomi looked down briefly, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook again before she answered. She realized I was not trying to take anything from her, she said. I was trying to keep something from being lost. Ethan's expression shifted slightly at that. And you think that is what this is? He asked. Naomi looked back up, her gaze steady. I know it is, she said. The certainty did not push him back this time. It pulled him forward. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, somewhere deeper than that. Ethan took a step back, not away from her, but away from the intensity of the moment, as if he needed space to process something that could not be rushed. There was a place, he said slowly, more to himself than to her. A small room. Late at night. She used to go there when she did not want anyone to find her. Naomi watched him carefully, but did not interrupt. I never asked why, he continued. I thought giving her space was the right thing to do. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly as the realization formed more clearly. But maybe I just did not want to know. The admission did not sound like regret. It sounded like clarity. Naomi nodded once, quietly acknowledging it. Sometimes not asking is still a choice, she said. Ethan looked at her, the weight of that statement settling into place. And now I am here, he said, asking questions I should have asked years ago. Naomi did not respond with comfort or reassurance. She simply said, now you are listening. The distinction mattered. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting that settle, letting the noise of the city return just enough to remind him that the world had not stopped, even if his had shifted. Then he looked at her again, more focused now, more present. Where's that place? He asked. Naomi did not look surprised, as if she had been waiting for that question all along. She closed the notebook gently and slipped it into her bag, her movements calm and deliberate. Then she met his eyes one more time. It is still there, she said, but it is not the same. Ethan felt something steady inside him for the first time since this began. Not certainty, not yet, but intention. Take me there, he said. Naomi studied him for a brief moment, as if measuring whether he meant it, whether he understood what that request carried. Then she nodded once. All right, she said. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell was not leading the way. He was following. They did not speak much after that. The decision had already been made, and anything more would have felt unnecessary, almost like it might disturb something fragile that had just begun to take shape. Naomi lifted her guitar case, securing the latch with a quiet click, then adjusted the strap over her shoulder. Ethan watched her movements, noticing the ease in them, the lack of hesitation. She was not rushing, and somehow that slowed him down too. It is not far, she said, glancing toward the avenue before stepping off the curb. Ethan followed without question. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in years, he was not calculating his next move. He was simply walking. They moved through the city at a steady pace, weaving through crowds, crossing streets, passing storefronts that reflected pieces of them in the glass. Ethan caught glimpses of himself as they went, but something about those reflections felt distant, like he was looking at a version of himself that no longer fully applied. Naomi led without looking back often, but when she did, it was just enough to make sure he was still there, still choosing to follow. The rhythm of their steps settled into something quiet and consistent, the noise of the city gradually fading into the background as the streets grew narrower, less polished, more real. After several blocks, Naomi slowed slightly, then turned down a side street that Ethan would have passed without noticing. The buildings here were older, the brick worn in places, the windows dimmer. There was no sign announcing anything special, no indication that this place held meaning. But Ethan felt it before he saw it. That same tightening in his chest, that same pull that had stopped him days earlier. Naomi stopped in front of a narrow doorway set between two aging storefronts. The paint around it was chipped, the handle slightly tarnished from years of use. It looked ordinary, almost forgotten. She rested her hand on the door for a moment, not opening it yet, just letting it be there beneath her palm. "This is it," she said quietly. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes tracing the frame, the details, searching for something recognizable. "It looks smaller," he admitted. Naomi glanced at him, a faint, understanding expression crossing her face. "It always does," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. That made sense in a way he could not fully explain. He reached for the handle, then stopped, his hand hovering just short of it. The hesitation was new. He had opened doors his entire life without thinking twice. But this one felt different. Like it was not just a door. Like it was a threshold between who he had been and something he had not yet faced. Naomi noticed, but she did not push him. She simply stepped slightly to the side, giving him the space to decide. "You do not have to go in," she said softly. Ethan let out a slow breath, his eyes still on the door. "I do," he replied. Not because she told him to. Not because of the notebook. But because something inside him had already crossed that line. He reached forward and wrapped his hand around the handle. It was cool to the touch, solid, real. He turned it slowly, the soft click echoing louder than it should have. Then he pushed the door open. The air inside was different. Warmer. Quieter. The kind of quiet that held something. Not emptiness, but presence. A single light hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow across a small room filled with mismatched chairs and a simple wooden stage at the front. It was exactly as Naomi had described, and exactly as Ethan remembered. He stepped inside, his shoes making a faint sound against the worn floor, each step carrying him further into something he had not allowed himself to revisit. Naomi followed a moment later, closing the door behind them. The noise of the city disappeared almost instantly, replaced by a stillness that felt almost intentional. Ethan's gaze moved slowly across the room, taking in every detail, every corner, every shadow. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "She stood there," he said quietly, nodding toward the small stage. Naomi did not respond. She did not need to. Ethan walked forward, each step measured, deliberate, until he reached the edge of the stage. He stopped, looking up at it, not as a billionaire, not as a man who controlled outcomes, but as someone remembering something he had once overlooked. The space held the echo of a voice that was no longer there. And for the first time, Ethan realized it had never really left. The room did not welcome him. It did not reject him either. It simply held its ground, unchanged, waiting. Ethan stood at the edge of the stage, his eyes fixed on the worn wood where time had left faint marks from footsteps long gone. He could almost hear it again, the quiet shuffle of a chair, the soft clearing of a throat before a song began, the kind of sound that never made headlines but stayed with you long after everything else faded. Naomi remained a few steps behind, not interrupting, not guiding, just present. She understood this part was not hers to lead. Ethan stepped up onto the stage slowly, the slight creak beneath his shoes sounding louder than it should have in the stillness. He stopped at the center, looking out, at the empty chairs arranged in uneven rows. They were not perfect. Some leaned slightly. Others had scratches across their backs. But together, they formed something intentional. A place for listening. A place for being seen without being watched. He swallowed, his throat tightening as the memory shifted from distant to immediate. "She hated big rooms," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach Naomi without breaking the silence. "Said they made everything feel like a performance instead of something real." Naomi nodded once, her eyes moving across the space as if she could still see it filled. "She told me that," she said. Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze lowering to the floor of the stage. "I thought I understood what she meant," he continued, "but I never stayed long enough to prove it." The admission hung in the air, not heavy with regret, but with recognition. Naomi stepped a little closer now, her footsteps soft against the floor. "You came," she said. Ethan gave a slight nod, though his eyes remained distant. "Sometimes," he replied, "when it fit into everything else." Naomi did not respond immediately. Instead, she set her guitar case down near the front row, opening it with a quiet click before lifting the instrument out. The movement was natural, almost instinctive, like she belonged here in a way that did not need explanation. Ethan noticed, his gaze shifting toward her, watching as she adjusted the strap and settled the guitar comfortably against her side. "What are you doing?" he asked, though his tone was not sharp. It was curious. Naomi met his eyes briefly, then looked toward the stage. "What she asked me to do," she said. Ethan felt something shift again, that same pull that had brought him here, but stronger now. Naomi stepped up onto the stage beside him, not taking the center, not trying to replace anything, just standing slightly off to the side where the light touched her face softly. She did not speak again. She just began to play. The first chord filled the room differently than it had on the street. Here, it did not compete with anything. It settled. It expanded. It reached into the corners and brought the silence. With it, Ethan felt it immediately, not just as sound, but as something physical, something that moved through him without permission. Naomi's voice followed, steady and grounded, carrying the same melody, the same truth, but now it felt closer, more direct. Not something passing by, something being offered. Ethan's hands lowered slightly at his sides, his posture shifting as if the music itself was asking something of him. He did not move away. He did not interrupt. He listened, really listened. The song unfolded slowly, each line carrying a weight that felt more intentional in this space, as if it had been waiting to return here all along. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, not to escape it, but to meet it fully. And in that quiet, something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for him to hear what he had missed before. Enough for him to understand that this was never just about a song. When Naomi reached the final note, she did not rush to fill the silence that followed. She let it remain, letting the room hold it the way it always had. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, his gaze moving from the empty chairs back to her. He did not speak right away, because for the first time, he was not trying to respond. He was trying to understand. And somewhere in that silence, he realized something he had not allowed himself to admit. She had not left him with nothing. She had left him with something he had chosen not to hear. The silence did not break right away. It lingered, stretching across the small room like something alive, something that refused to be rushed. Ethan stood still at the center of the stage, his eyes no longer searching, no longer analyzing, but absorbing. The last note of Naomi's voice seemed to remain in the air, not as sound, but as presence. He let out a slow breath, one he had not realized he had been holding, and for a moment, he did not move. Naomi lowered her guitar gently, her fingers resting against the strings to quiet their faint vibration. She did not speak. She did not need to. The room itself felt like it was speaking now, filling the space between them with something deeper than words. Ethan finally shifted, his gaze moving across the empty chairs again. But this time he was not seeing absence. He was seeing moments, fragments, a version of the past he had once stood too far from to understand. She was trying to tell me something, he said quietly, the realization forming as he spoke it. Naomi watched him, her expression calm, but attentive. She always was, she replied. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes lowering as if replaying something he had not allowed himself to fully hear before. I thought I was giving her freedom, he continued. Space to be who she wanted to be. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. But maybe I was just not paying attention. The admission settled into the room without resistance. Naomi stepped a little closer, her presence steady, grounded. There is a difference, she said. Ethan let out a breath that felt heavier than the ones before. I see that now, he said. His voice did not carry regret the way someone might expect. It carried something else. Understanding. The kind that arrives too late to change the past, but just in time to change what comes next. He turned slightly, facing Naomi more directly now, his expression no longer guarded. What else did she leave, he asked. Naomi did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached down and picked up her guitar case, setting it gently on one of the chairs near the front row. Then she opened her bag and pulled out the notebook again, holding it with the same care as before. Not everything was written as a song, she said. Ethan stepped down from the stage slowly, closing the distance between them, his focus entirely on the notebook now. Naomi opened it, flipping past the pages he had already seen, moving deeper into something less familiar. She stopped at a section near the back, where the handwriting changed slightly. Not in style, but in weight. The lines were firmer, more intentional. She turned the notebook toward him. This was the last part, she said. Ethan looked down, his eyes scanning the page, taking in the words one line at a time. There was no introduction, no explanation, just a message. Direct, personal. She had written about time again, but differently this time. Not as something that slips away, but as something that reveals. She wrote about choices that seem small in the moment, but shape everything that follows. About how listening is not the same as hearing, and how understanding requires more than presence. Ethan felt each word settle into him, not as something new, but as something that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. His throat tightened slightly as he reached the final line. He did not read it out loud. He did not need to. Naomi watched him carefully, her expression steady, giving him the space to process it in his own way. After a moment, Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his gaze lifting slowly to meet hers. She knew, he said. It was not a question. Naomi nodded once. She always did, she replied. Ethan let out a quiet breath, his posture shifting as if something inside him had finally settled into place. And she trusted you to bring this to me, he said. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. She trusted that I would not let it be forgotten, she said. The distinction mattered. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, not as a stranger anymore, not as someone holding answers, but as someone who had carried something important when he had not been able to. Why did you wait? He asked. Naomi glanced down briefly, then back up. Because you were not ready before, she said. Ethan considered that, the truth of it settling in without resistance. And now, he asked quietly. Naomi's expression softened just slightly, not with emotion, but with certainty. Now you are listening, she said again. The words did not feel like repetition. They felt like confirmation. Ethan stood there in the quiet of the room, the past no longer distant, no longer buried, but present in a way that could not be ignored. And for the first time, he did not try to step away from it. He stepped into it. The room felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because Ethan was finally standing fully inside it. Not just physically, but in a way that left no distance between him and what he had avoided for years. The notebook remained open in his hands, the last words still echoing in his mind, not as something written in ink, but as something that had always been waiting for him to understand. He ran his thumb slowly along the edge of the page, not turning it, not closing it, just feeling its presence. Naomi watched quietly, giving him the space to move at his own pace, the same way the room had always allowed truth to arrive without force. She was not asking for anything, Ethan said after a long moment, his voice steady but lower than before. She was leaving something behind. Naomi nodded slightly. She knew you would see it differently later, she said. Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting across the empty chairs again. But this time, they did not feel like witnesses. They felt like reminders of moments that had happened without him fully being there, of conversations he had heard without truly listening. I thought I had time, he said quietly. Time to go back. Time to ask the questions I avoided. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. Time to understand her when it was more convenient. Naomi did not interrupt. She let the words settle, not correcting them, not softening them. Ethan closed the notebook gently, holding it for a moment before looking back at her. She did not wait, he said. She moved forward. Naomi met his eyes, her expression calm but firm. She always did, she replied. Ethan nodded once, the truth of it settling in without resistance. Then he looked down at the notebook again, his grip tightening just slightly, not out of tension, but out of recognition. And she trusted that this would find me, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Not exactly, she said. Ethan looked up, his brow tightening in quiet curiosity. Naomi held his gaze, steady as ever. She trusted that you would find yourself, she said. The distinction landed deeper than anything else had. Ethan stood still, the weight of it pressing into something he could no longer ignore. Because this was not about coincidence. It was not about chance. It was about direction. About something that had been set in motion long before he ever realized he was moving away from it. He turned slowly, his eyes moving back to the stage, to the exact spot where he had just stood moments ago. She stood there, he said again, but this time it sounded different. Not like a memory, like a realization. Naomi followed his gaze, but remained where she was. Yes, she said softly. Ethan took a step toward the stage, then another, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with a kind of clarity that had not been there before. When he reached the edge, he did not stop. He stepped up again, returning to the center, but this time he did not look out at the room the same way. He looked down, at the floor, at the space where sound had once started. He stood there for a moment, silent, then spoke, not loudly, not for anyone else, but because something inside him needed to be said out loud. "I did not hear you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried more than apology. They carried acknowledgement. Naomi listened from where she stood, her presence steady, grounded. Ethan lifted his head slowly, his gaze moving forward again, but not past the moment this time. Through it. "But I do now," he continued. The shift was quiet, but it was real. Not dramatic, not sudden, but enough to change what came next. He stepped down from the stage again, walking back toward Naomi, the notebook still in his hand. When he stopped in front of her, there was no distance left between what he knew and what he was willing to face. "What did she want me to do with this?" he asked. Naomi did not look at the notebook. She looked at him. "She did not tell me that part," she said. Ethan frowned slightly, not in frustration, but in thought. "Then why bring me here?" he asked. Naomi's expression softened just slightly, not with emotion, but with clarity. "Because this is where you stopped listening," she said. Ethan felt the truth of that immediately. He glanced around the room one more time, but now it did not feel like something separate from him. It felt connected, intentional, necessary. "And now?" he asked quietly. Naomi held his gaze, steady, certain. "Now you decide what happens after that," she said. The answer did not give him direction. It gave him responsibility. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell did not try to avoid it. He accepted it. The responsibility did not feel heavy in the way Ethan expected. It did not press down on him or demand immediate action. Instead, it settled into him quietly, like something that had finally found the place it belonged. He stood there for a moment longer, the notebook still in his hand, Naomi's words echoing not as instructions, but as a turning point. Then he moved. Not away from it, not past it, into it. He walked back toward the stage again, slower this time, more aware of each step, as if he understood now that movement itself carried meaning. Naomi did not follow immediately. She stayed where she was, watching, giving him the space to take this part on his own. Ethan stepped up onto the stage once more, but this time he did not stop at the center. He kept walking until he reached the far side, near the edge where the light softened and shadows gathered just slightly. He turned back to face the room, but instead of seeing empty chairs, he imagined something else. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. Enough to feel the presence of people who had once sat there. Enough to understand that this had never been about performance. It had always been about truth. He looked down at the notebook again, then slowly opened it, flipping past the pages he had already read until he found a blank space. It was not completely empty. There were faint impressions from previous pages, like echoes pressed into the paper, barely visible, but still there. He ran his fingers across it lightly, then reached into his coat and pulled out a pen. The motion felt unfamiliar, not because he had not written before, but because this time it was not for contracts or decisions or outcomes. This time, it was something else. He hesitated for a brief moment, the pen hovering just above the page. Then he began. The first word did not come easily. It never does when it matters. But once it was there, the next followed, and then another. He did not rush. He did not try to perfect it. He simply wrote. Naomi watched from below, her expression unchanged, but her attention fully present. She understood what was happening, even without reading a single word. Ethan was not just responding. He was continuing something, carrying it forward in a way that had been waiting for him to choose. When he finished, he did not read it out loud. He did not need to. He closed the notebook gently, holding it for a moment before stepping down from the stage again. This time, when he walked back toward Naomi, there was something different in his posture. Not confidence in the way he had always carried it. Something quieter, more grounded. He stopped in front of her, the notebook resting in his hand, and met her eyes. She was not asking me to fix anything, he said. Naomi nodded slightly. No, she replied. She was asking you to understand. Ethan let out a slow breath, the truth of it settling into place without resistance. And to continue it, he added. Naomi's gaze held steady. If that is what you choose, she said. The choice. It was always there. But now it felt real in a way it had not before. Ethan looked down at the notebook once more, then back at Naomi. You carried this for her, he said. It was not a question. Naomi gave a small nod. I carried what I could, she said. Ethan considered that, then extended the notebook toward her. Naomi looked at it, then at him, her brow tightening slightly in quiet confusion. "Why are you giving it back?" she asked. Ethan's expression softened, just slightly, but enough to show that something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. "Because it was never mine to hold alone," he said. Naomi studied him for a moment, as if measuring the weight of that answer, then reached out and took the notebook. This time, the exchange felt different. Not like something being passed, like something being shared. Ethan stepped back slightly, creating just enough space to see the room again, to feel it as part of something larger than the moment they were standing in. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Naomi closed the notebook, holding it close for a brief moment before answering. "That depends on what you do when you leave this room," she said. Ethan turned his gaze toward the door, the same door he had hesitated to open not long ago. But now it did not feel like a barrier. It felt like a continuation. He nodded once, not to her, not to the room, but to something within himself that had finally aligned. Then he took a step forward, ready to carry something he had once left behind, not as a burden, but as a choice. The door opened without resistance this time. Ethan stepped out first, the late afternoon light spilling across the sidewalk and catching briefly against his eyes. The city had not changed while he was inside. Traffic still moved in restless lines. Conversations overlapped in fragments. The same rhythm, the same pace. But something about it felt different now, not because the world had shifted, but because he had. Naomi followed a moment later, closing the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to separate what had happened inside from everything waiting outside. Ethan paused on the sidewalk, not rushing forward, not reaching for his phone, not returning to the version of himself that had walked these streets without seeing them. Instead, he looked around. Really looked. The small details he had ignored before began to surface. The way a man adjusted his tie before crossing the street. The way a woman laughed into her phone, unaware of anyone else. The way sound carried differently, depending on where you stood. It was all there before. He just had not noticed. Naomi stood beside him, quiet, letting him take in the moment without interruption. "It feels louder out here," Ethan said after a moment. Naomi gave a small nod. "It always does after you hear something clearly," she replied. Ethan considered that, then let out a slow breath, his shoulders easing slightly, as if something he had been holding for years had finally loosened its grip. "I spent so much time trying to control everything," he said. "Every outcome, every decision." He paused, glancing briefly at the people passing by. "But I never stopped long enough to understand what I was actually moving past." Naomi did not respond right away. She let the words settle, the same way she had done since the beginning. Then she said, "Understanding does not happen while you are rushing." Ethan nodded slowly, the truth of it no longer something he resisted. A black car slowed near the curb, his driver stepping out. Quickly, clearly having found him after searching. "Sir, the board is waiting," the driver said, his tone respectful but urgent. Ethan looked at him, then at the car, then back at the street. For a brief moment, the old rhythm tried to return. The schedules, the expectations, the constant forward motion. But it did not take hold the same way. Not anymore. "Tell them I will be there," Ethan said calmly. The driver nodded, relieved, and moved back toward the car. But Ethan did not follow. Not yet. He turned back to Naomi, his expression steady, no longer searching for answers, but acknowledging something that had already been found. "You knew this would happen," he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. "I knew something would," she replied. Ethan gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, not out of amusement, but recognition. "She knew too," he said. Naomi's gaze softened just slightly. "She believed you would get here," she said. Ethan looked down the street again, then back toward the door behind them. The place did not feel distant anymore. It felt connected, like something he could return to, not physically, but intentionally. "I think I understand now," he said quietly. Naomi studied him for a moment, as if measuring the weight behind his words. "Understanding is not the end," she said. "It is the beginning." Ethan nodded once, the simplicity of that truth settling in without resistance. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small card, then paused, looking at it for a second before lowering his hand again. "I was going to offer you something," he said. Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly, curious but not expectant. Ethan met her eyes. "But I do not think that is what you need," he continued. Naomi gave a small, knowing nod. "No," she said. Ethan slipped the card back into his coat. Then let me ask you something instead, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. What is that? She asked. Ethan took a breath, not out of hesitation, but intention. Will you come back here? He said, glancing briefly toward the door. And keep playing? Naomi looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable at first. Then slowly, something softer appeared. Not surprise. Not hesitation. Recognition. That was always the plan, she said. Ethan nodded, accepting that answer fully. For the first time, there was no need to add anything else. No need to control what came next. He turned toward the car again, but this time, when he stepped forward, it was not out of habit. It was a choice. And as he moved through the city once more, the noise did not drown everything out. It became part of something he could finally hear. The car door closed with a soft, controlled sound, sealing Ethan back into a world that had always moved faster than he could feel. But this time, the silence inside the vehicle did not feel like control. It felt like space. Real space. The kind that allowed something new to settle without being rushed away. The city passed by outside the tinted windows, buildings stretching upward, people moving with purpose, lights shifting as the afternoon leaned toward evening. It was the same city he had always known. But now, it no longer felt like something to conquer. It felt like something to move through. He leaned back slightly in the seat, his hand resting against his coat where the notebook had been earlier, the absence of it noticeable, but not empty. It was not gone. It was where it needed to be. His driver glanced at him briefly through the rearview mirror, as if checking for instructions, for direction, for the next decision. Ethan did not give one right away. He simply watched. The rhythm of the street. The way everything continued without waiting for anyone to catch up. And for the first time, he did not feel the need to outrun it. The car slowed as it approached the glass tower where everything he had built still stood waiting. Meetings. Decisions. Expectations stacked neatly in a schedule that had once defined every hour of his day. The driver stepped out quickly, opening the door, the familiar routine unfolding exactly as it always had. Ethan stepped out, adjusting his coat slightly, his posture still composed, still steady. But something in his expression had changed. Not softer, not weaker, just clearer. As he walked through the revolving doors, the polished floors reflected his movement, the quiet efficiency of the space responding to his presence. Assistants moved quickly, voices lowered, conversations shifting as he passed. It was all the same, but he was not. Mr. Caldwell, the board is ready, his assistant said, falling into step beside him. Ethan nodded once, acknowledging the information without immediately accelerating his pace. Give me 5 minutes, he said calmly. The assistant blinked, slightly surprised, but nodded. Of course. Ethan turned down a different hallway instead, one that led to a smaller conference room he rarely used. The space was quiet, empty, the city visible through a wide window stretching across the far wall. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the faint click creating a brief echo in the stillness. He walked to the table slowly, then stopped, his gaze lifting to the skyline beyond the glass. For a moment, he said nothing, did nothing. He simply stood there. Then, after a breath that felt deeper than the ones before, he reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second, not out of hesitation, but intention. Then he opened a blank note. The screen reflected faintly against the glass as he began to type. Not fast, not rushed. The same way he had written in the notebook. Word by word, thought by thought. He did not write for the board. He did not write for the company. He wrote for something that had only just begun to take shape. A plan, not of expansion or control, but of return, of presence, of creating space where something real could exist again. When he finished, he did not reread it. He did not edit it. He saved it, then locked the screen, slipping the phone back into his coat. The decision did not need refinement. It needed action. Ethan turned and walked back toward the door, his steps steady, grounded in a way they had not been before. When he re-entered the main hallway, his assistant was waiting, ready to guide him back into the rhythm he had always followed. But this time, when he stepped into the boardroom, the room did not define him. He defined what came next. Conversations paused as he entered, attention shifting immediately, the usual expectations settling into place. Ethan walked to the head of the table, then stopped, his gaze moving across the faces waiting for direction, for control, for certainty. He placed his hands lightly against the back of the chair, not sitting yet. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but clear, carrying through the room without effort, "there is something we are going to change." The room stilled, the shift immediate. Not dramatic, but undeniable. And as Ethan Caldwell stood there, no longer just leading from what he had built, but from what he had finally understood, the direction of everything in that room began to move in a way it never had before. Not faster, not louder, but more real.